Hello everybody. Today I have a very beautiful camera for review on my YouTube channel. This is the Canon New F-1, the third and latest iteration of Canon's flagship 35mm single lens reflex camera. This particular version was released in September of 1981 after two predecessors, each a step advanced over the last, and this has a cult following even to this day in the film photography community. It rivals right up there with the Nikon F3 and the Minolta XK. They're company's respective flagship cameras, but I wanted to review this just for a very novice photographer, or maybe a relative had found their Canon camera in an attic of a relative's basement or attic, or they were gifted this camera by someone that they love, similar to me. This camera was gifted to me by an acquaintance of mine, and I really appreciated that kind gesture. So, without further ado, let's get started. This is going to be a very simplified, generic review, not really going in depth, just basic standard operation procedures. So, this camera is very advanced. As I said, it was Canon's flagship film camera in the 70s and into the 1980s. Now, the three iterations were as follows. The Canon F1 was released in the early to mid-1970s. The Canon F1N was released in the late 1970s, which included a little bit of updated features. And this was the latest version, as I said, the Canon New F1, released in September of 1981. So let's get started on the review. This camera is very advanced. So let's first start off with mounting and dismounting a lens. Now, Canon FD lenses have two types of lens mounting systems. This is the breech lock system, where the bezel on the lens itself moves. Try to get. Now, I believe that is a Canon as well. Yes, it's a Vivitar that can be used with Canon cameras. This is a Canon 70 to 210, and this operates differently, where there's an actual lock on the lens itself that allows you to put the camera and the lens into aperture mode. But dismounting this lens right here is a Vivitar 28mm. I believe it's an f2.8. You press this button in here on the camera, and that will allow you to move the bezel on the lens counterclockwise. The actual bezel on the lens rotates, whereas this, the bezel does not rotate. This is the aperture selection. This is that bezel, so this does not move. So to mount it, you align the red dot with the red dot and turn clockwise until you hear a click. Now, you cannot move this lens off of there without pressing this button in and turning the whole lens counterclockwise. And the button on the side of the lens here. See? That is the standard lens, or the newer version of the FD mount lens. This is the older version with the breech lock system. So, to reassociate the lens to the camera, align the red dot with the red dot, and simply you want to make sure that the red dot on the mount is aligned with the red line in the center of the lens to reassociate it. So then you just spin the lens back into place. If I can figure out how to do that, that would be lovely. There we go. All right, perfect. So now that's mounting and dismounting a lens. Now, what does this button do? Well, this is your depth of field preview. If you have the lens set to an aperture setting, not the A for aperture priority, let's say f/22 for example, and we push out this slider here, this will give you a preview in the viewfinder itself what the camera is metering the light for based off of the aperture selected on the lens. So again, lower aperture number on the lens means that you'll get more light into the viewfinder with this depth of field preview on. A higher number means there's less light coming into the lens, which means you'll get a darker picture in the viewfinder if you're looking at it through the depth of field preview selection. So to turn it off, just push the lever back in, and you will not get a preview of what the camera viewfinder sees before you take the picture in terms of light. Now that covers everything for operation on the side of the camera. Now let's go over to the battery. The battery is attached by this button down here, and you simply lift up. Do not lose this, because no one wants to walk around with a camera that looks like this. This takes a 6-volt CR2 battery that can be found online. They're not so difficult to find anymore. Online is really the only place you can get them, though. Make sure that the strap lug does not block the battery door. There's a little lip on the battery door as well. You want to make sure that's associated back in there. And then hear that click, which means you're ready to go with the battery. Now, let's move to the top of the camera, going from your left to the middle to the right. Okay, starting from your left to your right on the top of the camera. This is your rewind knob. This allows you to rewind the film back into its canister once you have taken all of the available exposures on the frame, or excuse me, on the roll. So there are a bunch of locks on this side of the camera. You have a silver lock here, you have a black lock here, and then you have another silver lock on the dial. Well, how do you open the camera? Well, let's see. You have to push down on this big silver button and push up. Okay, now that the lever is pulled up, you would then pull up even further to release the door to the camera. I'm not going to do that because there's currently film in the camera. Now, what are the other locks for? Well, there's also two other programmable pieces to this dial, and that's the exposure compensation meter mode, or the exposure compensation dial, and the ASA reading dial here, which is your film speed. Every roll of 35mm film will come with a number on the side of it. That's your film speed. That's the grading of the film itself to be shot in the correct amount of light needed for that film speed. So, in order to move the exposure compensation, you have to press this black button down, and then from there, you will be able to move this selection. Lock it into place when you hear that click to make sure that it won't move. This button on the side here is for your ASA reading. So if you press that in and then move the entire wheel, you're able to change the film speed selection. Now, there's also a green dial marker here, which lets you know what film speed the camera is going to meter for. So you want to make sure that the number of the film speed, in this case 400, is lined up with the green slot on the dial. Now, going from the top here, this is your prism. The Canon New F-1 and all F-1s aforementioned earlier have a removable prism for waist level shooting and exchanging of focusing screens. So, how do you remove this? There are two buttons on the side of the prism. You simply hold in and slide backwards until it's completely off. This is the Canon AE Finder FN, and it's in beautiful condition. Beautiful condition. This is the focusing screen. So I'm going to turn it to you. You can see my fingers, which means that if you were shooting from a waist level point of view or vantage point, you'd be able to focus and compose your shots by holding the camera down to your waist as opposed to up to your eye through one of these finders. Now you can also remove and exchange the focusing screens. I don't have the specific tool to do that at this time, but there's two white dots. You just hold over this ledge here and push up with something that's not sharp but firm enough to pull that up, and you can then exchange the focusing screens. To reassociate the finder, you have to align both ledges, silver ledges. There's that one right there. On the other side, there's the other one with these two holes here, or slots rather. Now, you may be wondering why there's this piece here that sticks out. Well, there's an associating pin on the shutter speed dial that will lock up with the knob on the finder to send a computer reading or message to the computer to account for the amount of light coming into the camera based off of the aperture selected, because the A stands for aperture priority on the shutter speed dial. If you have the shutter speed dial set to A and the lens set to A, you basically have a programmed camera where the camera will automatically select an aperture and shutter speed based off of the amount of light the computer is sending to the inner workings of the camera. So to just press in, there we go. And then, well, at that point, the A is set in the middle, which is for aperture priority. At this point, you cannot move the shutter speed dial because the prism has locked into that nub on the shutter speed dial. So, that's the automatic way of taking pictures, this way. So if I look into the light and turn the camera on, which I'll go over in a second, which it already is, it will program for me the amount of light that it needs to take the picture. So if I go over here in the darker setting, you can tell that the shutter speed is much slower. So we know that the aperture priority works and the lens setting works as well. So I'll do that again for you. So, much slower photograph. All right, so moving over to the shutter speed knob, if I hold on a minute. If I move the shutter speed dial up in the upward position, I'm then able to disengage the knob and go to manual shutter speeds. So I will run through those for you now. This is 1/2000th of a second. You can see the shutter blades, and I apologize for earlier stating that there's film in the camera. There isn't. I'm going to remove this filter here because it's quite dirty and I don't want that to be in the video. So this is 1/1000th of a second. 1/500th, 1/250th, 1/125th. You know, I'll flip it around for you so you can see it from your vantage point. This is 1/60th of a second, 1/30th, 1/15th, and 1 second here. Okay, so I had to put the filter back on because the lens plate was loose. So we were at 1/15th. Now we're at 1/8. Oops, let's close that. 1/4 of a second. 1/2 of a second. And 1 full second. 2 full seconds. 4 seconds. 8 seconds. 'The flash sync speed, and B for bulb. As long as my fingers press down on the shutter button, the lens will be stopped down, the mirror will stay up, exposing the film until I release my finger from the shutter button. To reassociate the knob on the shutter speed dial, that silver knob with the peg on the viewfinder, pull up, go back around, and then pull up and reassociate back into place. Now, on the left side is your shutter speed dial, which we just went over. This is your shutter button, and then there's a lock on the shutter as well, which will be your A for active, L for lock, and that's in red, and then S for self-timer. I'll go over that for you now. Oh, I guess it didn't fire. So the self-timer might be having issues. Yeah, the self-timer's having issues. Okay, so we have to manually reset that. That's usually the self-timer working. It's not working now, of course, but we'll get over it. So that's really much it. This is your rewind selection. You have to press this button down first, and then make sure this is down here, which will allow you to rewind the film. Over here is the shutter viewfinder blind. If you're taking a long exposure, you don't want the light to come in through the viewfinder, so you block that by pulling that button down here. This is a meter function as well. So normal metering will meter the light when you have pressed the shutter button. A hold means that the meter will stay on for, I believe it's 16 seconds without depressing halfway the shutter button, so that you can manually operate the camera without needing to half press the shutter button. You're doing a longer exposure. And then light, which means that not only will the meter be on, but the interior lighting will be on. So if I move it over to light, the light comes on. inside the viewfinder. If I move it back to hold, it will stay on. I don't have to depress my finger on the shutter button. And if I set it back to normal, the meter goes back to the red, and then once I have press, the meter then operates. So that's the meter selection here. There's also a hot shoe on the top of the removable prism, and then this is your flash PC socket for a flash. Don't lose the nub on this here. It's very important that you keep it nice and steady. And then one other thing that I wanted to mention to you is the back. So the back of the film camera has a little slot here for the film cartridge back. So this part would be put into here to signify what the camera was currently using in terms of film. To the bottom, these are your connections for a automatic winder. This is the tripod socket, and then this is your rewind button. On the top here is the serial number. It is 262014, so that looks to me like it's a pretty low serial number. I'm not sure, but this camera is beautiful. I love it. If you have any questions, that about covers it up, by the way. If you have any questions, please let me know. Let me know if I missed anything. I don't believe I did, except opening the camera, but you know, every film camera opening the door and looking on the inside is practically the same. So without any other questions or concerns, on to the next video. Thank you very much.